Hello and welcome to Son of a Glitch. Join us as we explore some of the internet's craziest glitch stories. Story 1. I only vaguely remember the incident, but one night very late both of my grandparents were woken up by a loud sound. My grandmother swore it was a shotgun. My grandpa said it was a car backfiring since there was no one nearby who would be shooting. We lived pretty far from anyone, but near a highway. They bickered over it a bit, then went back to bed. About 15 minutes or so later, the phone rang. It was my aunt. Her husband had been shot with a shotgun by a neighbor just 20 minutes before. The thing is, they lived 7 states away. Did he survive? No. Point blank in the chest. Do you know why the neighbor shot him? Sort of. He was trying to play peacemaker between a neighbor's argument. From what I was told, he was talking to the guy and walking closer. The strange part came later. After the funeral, my grandmother found a small, black feather on their nightstand, the side closest to where she heard the shotgun blast. She doesn't own feathered pillows, and it was unlike anything in the house. A week later, she swore she saw my aunt's husband standing at the edge of the woods near their property, still wearing the clothes he was murdered in. When she called out to him, he turned and vanished into the trees. The highway behind the woods was completely silent. Story 2. I had this crazy vivid dream in 7th grade. I dreamed that there was a white cargo van parked outside my house. A man got out, walked to my house, broke in, then went to my brother's room and killed him. I woke up freaked out. It was 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep and went into the kitchen, turned the light on, and a few seconds later the headlights on a white cargo van outside flipped on, and it sped away. Did you even check on your brother to see if he was alive? Yeah, we had the same bedroom. I woke up after the guy killed my brother, so I don't know if he was going to kill me too. I've never died in a dream, so maybe that had something to do with it. The next morning, there were muddy footprints leading up to the front door, barefoot and oddly large. But the grass was dry and the weather had been clear for days. When my dad reviewed the doorbell camera, there was a 3-minute gap of static around 3:02 a.m., right when the van's lights came on. The footage resumed with nothing unusual, but when he paused the video, there was a single frame that showed a man's distorted face staring directly into the lens, his eyes completely black. Story 3. My mom has some friends that I've known my whole life. They're her age. Mom was single, so they used to babysit me sometimes. I went over to their apartment for Halloween when I was 4, and they took me trick-or-treating around their apartment complex. Fast forward 27 years, I'm married to a girl I met in college who had been born in the city I was raised in, but almost immediately moved away. She was less than a year old. She'd lived in other parts of our large metro DFW and the LA area growing up. She's heard my mom and I mention these family friends occasionally, but never met them. Wife and I throw a Christmas party to celebrate our new house. My mom asks if she can invite said friends, so I said of course. They arrive and we get to chatting. They ask about my wife's unusual maiden name, and if she knew people who have the same first names as her parents. These family friends of ours were her parents' neighbors, as in, shared a wall. Literally the only other door on the 2nd floor of the same building at the time my now wife was born. I'm 3 years 9 months older than my wife. Our family friends' neighbors had an 8-month-old infant when I went trick-or-treating at their house. I met my future wife as an infant out of total happenstance before not meeting her for another 18+ years. After the party, we found an old Polaroid tucked behind a mirror in a box of my mom's Christmas decorations. It showed me in costume, standing in the hallway of that apartment complex. Next to me, barely visible in the shadows, was someone holding a baby in a lavender onesie. The baby had a very faint birthmark on the side of her neck, the same one my wife has now. But what chilled us most was the timestamp, October 31st, 1993. It was taken at 10:14 p.m. My wife was born at 10:14 p.m. Story 4. I once got into a weird, it's complicated thing with a girl who later turned out to have been born the same day in the same hospital. And our mothers shared their hospital room with us for the first few days of our lives. She literally was the first girl I ever met. It's kind of a pity that never went anywhere. Dude, follow that. It's fate. Oh, I tried. We grew up just 10 miles from each other, but outside that one period when we were 20, we never really met, which was weird because we had some oddly similar events in life. We repeated the same years in high school, then started to study nearly the same in different cities. In the end, this whole thing just petered out until it was just friendly birthday wishes every few years. Years later, I visited my childhood home and found an old diary entry of my mother's. It had a photo of two newborns in bassinets. She'd labeled them our son, and the girl next to him, quiet, always watching him. What struck me was that the girl's eyes were wide open in every picture, even when I was sleeping. My mom wrote, she stared at him all night. It was like she knew him already. The weirdest part? The girl's name was never mentioned. Just the girl, as if she was never truly a stranger, or maybe not entirely real. Story 5. I was born the same day my grandfather died. I've always been known to be extremely identical to him. Even though we have zero biological connection to each other, he was my mom's stepfather. Apparently, when I was younger, about 5, my family was talking about him and passed around a picture. I had never seen a picture of him before. I point him out and say, "Oh, I know him. I saw him on the way down." Mom says her heart froze. And while I'm known, like my grandpa, to be clever and sarcastic and mess around, I sincerely don't think that was my intention when I was 5. Years later, I had a recurring dream about walking through a fog-covered field with a man I'd never met. He would always stop at the same tree and say, "This is where I waited for you." One night, I woke up from the dream and saw that same tree sketched into the condensation on my window. My mother swears she didn't touch it. When I described the man, she quietly brought out an old journal of my grandfather's. Inside, he had drawn the same tree and written, "If I can't meet him in life, I'll wait for him here." Story 6. Had a dream about being on the phone with my great-uncle, who I hadn't seen in years. Later that day, he called and wanted to talk about the same thing we had discussed in the dream. Freaked me right out. I had a similar experience, but it was the night my grandpa passed away. I didn't know until the next morning that he had died. But in my dream, he, my dad, my brother, my cousin, and I just sat on the deck of my childhood home drinking whiskey and laughing. It was an incredibly long dream, and no words were exchanged, just feelings and laughter. Might not be the same kind of glitch in the system sort of thing, but it was one of the weirder things to ever happen to me. In my case, my great-uncle wanted to discuss his coming death. His kids bailed on him as soon as they each turned 18 and hadn't even friended him on Facebook. Now that he was in his 80s and dying from cancer, they were acting all nice to him. He left everything to me, and his kids are tying it all up in court, claiming I manipulated him, even though I actually tried to get him to just donate it all. I later checked my phone's call log out of curiosity. The incoming call from my great-uncle was time-stamped at 2:43 a.m., the exact time I'd been dreaming. But more unsettling, the number listed wasn't his. It was just a long string of zeros. When I asked him about it later, he paused, looked confused, and said, "I never called you." Story 7. About a year ago, my mom and I were in the first parking space area of a small shopping mall. She was getting things ready for the store, and I was waiting. The space in front of us had parked a large white SUV. I can't explain why, but I had the urge to study the SUV, even though I usually don't pay attention. The family that owned the SUV came out. It was a father, infant in a carrier, and a little girl. The little girl stared at us the whole time her father was getting her in the car. She had this huge, oversized bow in her hair and a side ponytail, and just kept staring. Even as they walked to the driver's side, she didn't take her eyes off of us. The father packed her up. My mom also stared at her. It was so strange. We went into the store right after the whole family was in the SUV. When we went to open the door, the same family came out. Odd little girl, father, baby, and the father was still holding shopping bags. My mom and I looked at each other in horror, because it took him 5 minutes to pack his kids in that SUV. How could he get out and run into the store in the few seconds it took us to walk to the sidewalk in front of the store? We weren't the only ones who saw it. A worker from the food place next to the store saw it, and we all exchanged looks of horror. That night, my mom couldn't sleep and decided to review the store's security camera footage, since she works there. What they found was chilling. The tape showed the family loading into the SUV, then suddenly they blinked out of frame. Less than 10 seconds later, the same family walked past the camera from the direction of the parking lot. But when the footage was paused, the little girl's face looked pixelated, like it was glitched. Her eyes were just black voids. Story 8. Dude, this exact type of thing happened to me years ago. I was hurrying to catch a train and noticed this guy who was exiting the subway as I was going in. I noticed him because his outfit didn't match the weather. It was late February and rather cold, and he was in khaki shorts, a purple Life is Good shirt, flip-flops, and had a beach bag. A few stops later, around 5 minutes, we pull up to the platform and the door opens, and the same exact guy is standing there waiting for the train. From where he got off to that stop, there was zero possibility of him getting there above ground. It was morning rush hour traffic, and I was on an express train, so it was running even faster. Still can't explain it. I thought maybe I imagined it, until I noticed something strange. The guy had a tattoo on his ankle, a star with 3 dots underneath. 2 weeks later, I saw the same man again, in the same clothes, standing outside the same station, but this time he was staring directly at me. He smiled, raised his hand, and pointed to my wrist. When I looked down, I had faint red marks in the shape of 3 dots. They were gone by morning. Story 9. I had a dream of my ex-girlfriend before I met her. Red hair, hazel eyes, standing at the corner of where 3 streets meet. She was holding a purple luggage bag and crying. Turns out, 2 years later, that was where we'd be when we broke up. Funny enough, several years later, I now live at the apartment building where that corner is. I smoke in the back lane to avoid looking at it. One night, I had a dream that I was standing at that same corner again. This time she wasn't crying, she was smiling. When I woke up, I felt compelled to go outside. It was 2:47 a.m. I walked to the corner, just to prove to myself it was nothing. But sitting exactly where she stood in my dream was the purple luggage bag. Nothing inside. No ID. Just a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. You left me here once. Don't forget again. Story 10. I dreamt of my now wife long before I met her. Later that day, my dream came swimming up during a class, and I wrote in my notes what she looked like, where she lived, and 1 or 2 details that I could remember. A year or 2 later, and I was starting to lose confidence, and there she was. I mean, self-fulfilling prophecy to be sure, but the details were spot on. I even showed her my notebook, and she agreed it was pretty odd. Also dreamt of my daughter long before we had her. Very vivid dream. Turned to the little girl in the passenger seat and said, "What do you think? You're smart." Little girl just nodded. Wife's reaction: "You let our future child sit in the front, and without a booster chair?" A few days after our daughter was born, I had another dream. I was driving the same car, same road, same little girl, but this time she turned to me and said, "It's not me you dreamed of. I'm still waiting." When I looked again, her eyes were completely black and her smile stretched too far. I woke up in a panic and checked on my daughter. She was asleep, but in her tiny hand, she held a piece of paper I didn't recognize. It read, "She knows." Story 11. Okay, I have this memory and no one will believe me, but here we go. When I was probably 10 or 11, my mom was harping on me for not doing my chores. She was downstairs with me, and I stormed upstairs to avoid her. When I got upstairs, she was in the kitchen doing dishes. There are no other ways to the second floor. She smiled, and I almost shot myself. "Did you tell her?" "Yeah." She laughed and told me to go do my chores. Later that night, I heard humming from the kitchen while lying in bed, an old lullaby I hadn't heard since I was a baby. I went downstairs, expecting to see my mom. But the kitchen was dark. I checked her room. She was dead asleep. The next morning, I asked her about the song. She said only my grandma used to hum that, and she had passed away before I was born. But then she added quietly, "I heard it too." Story 12. When I was 14 or so, I went to sleep at my typical time and woke up 2 days later in the morning. I went downstairs panicking and asking if my family knew I had been sleeping for 2 days and what had happened. The question was ignored, and they told me to sit down and have some breakfast. How did you just take that in stride? Well, no one would listen. So what else could I do? I have kind of suspected my dad may have put something in a drink or some food, but I don't let myself get too far because I'd like to retain my sanity. Later that week, I found a sticky note in my notebook written in my own handwriting. It said, "Don't ask them. They're not your family anymore." I had no memory of writing it. When I checked the notebook again an hour later, the note was gone, completely vanished. Pages were intact, no tears. Just gone. Story 13. This kind of happened to me, same age, but I remember going to sleep in the mid-afternoon. I woke up an hour later, went to bed at 4 o'clock, woke up at 5 o'clock. I thought I just took a nap, but it turns out I slept for 25 hours. This happened in the summer, and my parents said they just assumed I was at my friend's house. It was a really weird feeling to think about missing an entire day. Months later, I started finding drawings in my sketchbook, pages filled with symbols and diagrams I didn't remember making. One page had a detailed layout of a house I'd never been to. A friend recognized it as a building abandoned in our town since the 1950s. When we went to check it out, I knew exactly where everything was, down to the broken step near the cellar. Story 14. I know that my parents used to leave me home for several days at a time when I was a kid, 15 or 16. They insist that this never happened. Several of those instances occurred after I'd had a significant injury and had to take care of myself: wound care, knee braces, icing. I tore every muscle in my right shoulder once. Took about a year to get full function. Works good now, over 25 years later. I broke my left distal metatarsal at about 16, as I recall, as I had a full driver's license. For all of these, they were not around. They have no memory of any of the injuries, nor ever leaving me for multiple days on my own. They also have no memory of the injuries that caused me to hop on one leg for a week, wear a neck brace for a few weeks, or not be able to stand up without screaming. Nothing. Nada. The thing is, you can see the scars on my body and feel the bump in the metatarsal from the break they refused to take me to the doctor for. I can show them all the scars, and they still say that they don't remember. I finally dug out an old photo album, hoping to find something from that year. Every picture from that time looked wrong. Faces slightly off, smiles too stiff. In one photo, there's a mirror in the background, and the reflection shows me lying on the couch in a cast, even though in the photo I'm standing. I showed my brother. He turned pale and said, "You weren't supposed to find that." Story 15. Bit late as usual, but I thought I might tell mine. Obviously, I don't remember this, but when I was around 2 or 3, my great-aunt and grandmother had just returned from Scotland, and the family was invited to watch the projection slideshow, showing my age, at my grandparents'. At my age, I wasn't very interested until there was a picture of a large pond/lake with some ducks. I piped up, "I know that place." Of course, everyone said that's not possible. It's on the other side of the world. I then proceeded to get cranky and say I used to live there with my mommy with the white hair. Then something about my horsey, and that I lived in the castle up the hill from the pond. Sure enough, the next slide was of the lake with some ruins further up the hill. My auntie apparently freaked out, turned the projector off, and wouldn't watch the rest. Years later, while traveling abroad, I happened to visit a small Scottish village on a whim. I didn't recognize the name, but when I saw the lake, I froze. It was the same place from the slideshow. I followed a narrow path uphill and found the ruins of a castle. At the entrance, a weathered plaque listed past residents. The last name on the list was mine, dated 1873. Story 16. When I was a kid, my family came upon the aftermath of a horrific car accident. Traffic was backed up and we slowly crept by while my parents tried, and failed, to distract us kids from the carnage. Later that night, the accident was on the news. Small town, not much else to report. They showed the accident scene and all 4 of us gasped/shouted at the same time. Those aren't the same cars. Everything else about the accident scene was identical, but the make, models, and colors of the cars were completely different from what all 4 of us remembered. We consulted amongst ourselves and we all remembered the same thing, but the image on the screen was totally different. We talked about that for months. A few weeks later, we passed by the same stretch of road again. There was a roadside memorial, flowers, candles, and framed photos. But what caught my eye was a picture of the crash that someone had laminated and left there. It wasn't the one from the news. It showed the exact cars we remembered, the crumpled silver sedan and red pickup. I took a photo of it with my phone, but when I checked my gallery later, it had been replaced with a blank black image. No metadata, no timestamp. Just black. Story 17. I have a very vivid memory of a very tall, thin, elderly African-American man sitting in a wide green armchair. This man had glasses, wore a button-down shirt, and dress slacks. I described this man to my parents one day around the age of 5 or 7, gave as much detail as I could, and my mom went down to the basement. She came back with a single photo and showed it to me. It was exactly who I described, same man, same chair. The man was my great-grandfather. He died in 1977. I was born in 1991. Years later, during a bout of insomnia, I wandered into the basement and found that same photo, taped behind the furnace, almost like someone had tried to hide it. On the back, written in faded pencil, "He still visits, especially the children." That night, I dreamed of the man again, sitting in the green chair in my bedroom, watching me. I haven't been able to sleep in total darkness since. Story 18. I don't know if it counts, but I remember my parents taking me home from school a long time ago. We went down the same road we'd probably gone down 100 times, and everything looked different. like small variations of the same landmarks, like a car that's always parked in this one house had a different color. A place that didn't have a fence suddenly had one, and an empty lot suddenly had a house. My parents thought we were lost, but we eventually made it back to the main road. I think we might have gone through a time slip or parallel universe. I've gone down that road again multiple times just to prove myself wrong or slip through one more time. One evening, I drove that same road alone, hoping to settle the mystery. As I passed the house with the new fence, I noticed a man standing perfectly still in the yard, staring at my car. I turned to look again, but he was gone. A minute later, my radio cut out and a voice whispered, "You're not supposed to be here again." My GPS glitched and rerouted me 3 times before letting me off the road altogether. Story 19. When I was younger, my parents took me to see the Polar Express. It was a great movie. In the early summer morning, I thanked my mom again for taking us to the movies. She had no idea what I was talking about. Later in the year, around Christmas, we went to the movies. I sat in horror as I watched the Polar Express during its opening week and knew exactly what was going to happen. What disturbed me most wasn't the plot. I remembered the animation frame by frame. The camera angles, the lighting, the way the snow looked. I even knew when the characters would blink. The moment that really got me was when the boy looks out the window and sees the train for the first time, because in my memory, he turned and looked straight at me. And as I sat in the theater watching it again, I swear he blinked and smiled. Story 20. Maybe you had read the book as a kid, didn't remember it, and hearing about a movie coming out triggered the memory. I am not sure, honestly. It wasn't the plot that got me. I could vividly remember the animation for it. There is probably a good explanation. Feeling the way I did will stick with me forever. I have a very similar story with the same movie. I remember when it came out, and I asked my dad if I had already seen it with his girlfriend at the time. I even remembered the name of her friend that went along with us. He said no, and explained to me it was just coming out. The next month, I went to the movies to see it with his girlfriend, and her friend tags along, and her son. The exact same scene as before. Wigged little me out. A few years later, while cleaning out a storage unit, I found a box of old VHS tapes. One was labeled Zmaz Train Movie. Curious, I popped it into a converter. It was the Polar Express, but dated 2 years before its official release. The footage was grainy, and the characters' faces were wrong, like they were unfinished. One of them turned toward the camera and whispered something. I reversed the audio. It said, "We've done this before." Story 21. I remember a time when I was about 9 or 10, and I was riding in a work truck with my father. He suddenly got a call on his phone, and when he answered it, it went straight to speaker, and a deep, distorted voice started yelling at us to get out of the truck or I'll murder you. The weirdest part was that my dad didn't even react. Just grabbed the phone and ended the call. That night, I snooped through my dad's contacts. The call had no number, just a blank space. I tried calling it back, but the line wouldn't connect. A few days later, I found a sticky note in the glove box with a number scribbled in red. "Do not answer." It matched the time of the call. I asked him about it, and he said nothing, just stared out the window and whispered, "It found us again." Story 22. My mom used to work during the day and leave me home alone when I was around 12 or 13, too old for daycare. She would ring the home phone periodically throughout the day to make sure everything was all right. One day I'm home alone, and the phone rings. I pick it up. "It's Mom." We have a short, normal conversation. "Everything going all right?" "Yeah." "Okay. Don't answer the door if anyone knocks," etc. 15 minutes later, the phone rings again. I pick it up, and it's Mom again. We exchange hellos, and I jokingly say, "You just called me." She goes very quiet for a minute, and then says, "I haven't called you today." After that, we made up a secret password just in case. But a few weeks later, it happened again, same voice, same tone, but when I asked for the password, it paused, then said, "You already know who I am." The line went dead. I checked the caller ID. It said the call was coming from inside the house. We never used the home phone again after that. Story 23. A little late to the party, but going to share anyway. So I have one nice suit. I have a total of 3 or so, but most of them are 6 to 10 years old, with a few stains and don't quite fit right anymore. I got a new one 2 years ago, and the thing fits me great. I look sharp. After my dad's funeral, I took it to get dry cleaned at the same cleaner I've used for 15 years, just down the street. I couldn't really remember picking it up, but it wasn't on my mind. I hadn't needed it. About a year later, I had a funeral to go to and could not, for the life of me, find my suit. I tore the house apart, checked my closet multiple times. Nothing. So I head to the dry cleaner and ask, "Is there any chance I left a suit here?" She checks and says I've never been a customer. Not in the system. No records. No family members. Nothing. I leave confused. When I get home, the suit is hanging in the middle of my closet, with a tag from that dry cleaner. Later that night, I noticed something odd. The dry cleaning tag had today's date on it. But I had just gotten home. There was no way it could have been freshly cleaned. The plastic was still warm, like it had just come from a pressing machine. I called the cleaner again, and the woman who picked up said, "We haven't had a working phone line for 3 days. Our power's been out." Then she hung up. Story 24. Not a lot of people believe me with this story, and I'm not much of a believer in anything that can't be proven. But here's my weird story. I was about 13 or 14, living with my mom and dad. I've never had much of a relationship with my dad. He was always gone for work or at the bars. So it was mostly just me and my mom. Her side of the family had drug issues and were heavy smokers. My grandma had been diagnosed with COPD, but kept smoking. Every day after school, I'd visit her with my mom. It went from oxygen tanks to nursing homes, then hospice. One night, my mom stayed at grandma's house. I called her because I couldn't stop thinking about the sadness. I fell asleep around 10 or 11. In the middle of the night, I had a dream of a silhouette of an old woman down a hallway. The air got thick. I felt pressure in my chest. I woke up groaning. I looked and saw the silhouette in the corner of my room. I immediately thought of my grandma. It was 3 a.m. I called my mom. She said Grandma was fine. Not a minute later, she called back. Grandma had just passed. After the funeral, I went to find a photo of my grandma to put in my room. When I opened the box, there was one I'd never seen before. It showed her standing at the end of a hallway, the same hallway from my dream. She was younger, and standing next to her was a boy who looked exactly like me. On the back, in her handwriting, "He found me again, just like before." Story 25. Mine is very similar. I was really close to my maternal grandparents, my grandpa especially. He had emphysema, and his quality of life wasn't great, but he never let it get him down. One summer, I went to a friend's dad's house for the weekend, about an hour and a half away. My grandpa was in the hospital, but stable. I was swimming with my friend when I suddenly got this horrible, sick feeling, pure dread and sadness. I immediately called my mom, and she said everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I told my friend's mom I needed to go home. On the way, I told her to drive by the hospital and drop me off at my grandparents', because I just knew. Sure enough, my whole family was gathered there. My grandpa had died just minutes before I called. A week later, we were cleaning out his things. I found a small, sealed envelope addressed to me, dated months before his death. Inside was a short note. "If you feel it, come home. I'll be waiting." There was no way he could have known. Unless he did.